we'll go ahead and we'll call the meeting to order. This is the City Council meeting on April 28th, 2020. And first item on the agenda is the roll call. Holly?
Boersma?
If it was Boersma, I'm here.
Carabello? Hume?
Here.
Hiley?
Here.
Hirsch?
Here.
Hunt?
Here.
Jensen?
Here.
Lagaki?
Here.
Majewski?
Here.
Reeves?
Here.
Riley?
Present.
And Schumacher.
Here.
There are 12 alders present.
Excellent. Next item is communications and presentations. And I have a few communications. I want to start out by saying that last week was Library Week, and we look forward to the library starting their curbside pickup soon. That'll be exciting. Next week is Drinking Water Week, Municipal Clerks Week, Public Service Recognition Week, and International Firefighters Day all occur next week. So we just wanted to recognize all the employees that are out there making great things happen in under unusual circumstances. One thing I want to try tonight is muting everybody, and hopefully that'll work. And then if you want to be recognized, if you could send me a chat in the chat box, a round circle in the top of the screen, and my screen will light up, and then I'll be more than happy to unmute you and recognize you to speak. And we'll see how that goes. I think we'll be able to maintain a little bit more order that way, and we won't talk over each other.
How are we going to do that with Fred? Right, or me. I can't do that, Mayor. This is Riley. I mean, I don't have. I'm only have you on phone. I don't have those features. They were probably if I were doing this on my tablet, but I've not yet mastered this enough to figure out how I can actually look at the materials in the packets and still, talk and blah, blah, blah. So I'm talking to you on my phone, Mayor. I am reading the materials on my tablet. So that's my situation. There are some things I want to talk about. So
we can either ignore that, or we can try to just mute the people that don't have access. I can do it either way, but just keep in mind that, there is a delay and people talk over each other. And if you could let me know that you want to speak before you speak, I'll try to recognize you. So we can try to do that.
I would vote for not muting, because I thought last time it worked pretty well. Like you said, maybe we need to interject every once in a while to let one person talk at a time, but I think it's very cumbersome to try to then do a chat thing and you to read the chat thing. I think that'd be very cumbersome on your part and our part.
Okay. Well, I'm willing to do whatever, so just keep in mind, I know I have one person already that wants to speak for communication, so I'll let Attorney Dragney go first, and if anyone else wants to speak after him, you can either send me a chat while he's speaking, or when he's done, you can let me know. It looks like Gene is going to be on deck, so Matt will go first, and then Gene, and then we'll go from there. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Mayor. I think this is when we thought we would discuss the amicus curiae brief that's being prepared by Assistant City Attorney Marcy Paulson on behalf of the City of Madison and other municipalities. Tim, is now an okay time for me to address that?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So as you may know, the Wisconsin legislature has filed a lawsuit challenging the authority of the Department of Health Services to issue the Safer at Home order, and that is pending, that case, that challenge is pending in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. As the city of Madison is working on a brief called a Friend of the Court brief. City's not a party to the case, but has requested permission to file a brief. And they have asked, the city attorney's office has asked if there are other communities, municipalities that would like to sign on to that brief. I've shared that with Mayor Swadley and Council President Hirsch, and discussed with them whether they or the city would want to sign on to that brief. The process has been a little confusing in terms of exactly what that would mean. Earlier today, I guess I thought that it would be something that Mayor Swadley and Alderperson Hirsch would be deciding whether they wanted to sign on individually in their official capacities. I learned later in the day that what they're looking for is for the city attorney to sign the brief if the municipality wants to participate. We didn't really have an opportunity to put this item on the agenda for tonight because of the timing of what they're doing. So I guess I thought I would let you all know that's happening and ask this question. If there's no objection to the city participating in the brief, I'd be happy to sign off on it as city attorney. If, on the other hand, any member of the council would prefer to not do that without having an opportunity to discuss it, see the brief, what have you, then I, of course, would respect that. I can tell you I've reviewed the brief, and essentially what it does is address, it speaks to the concern that the city of Madison and other municipalities may have about their inability to really address the pandemic successfully on their own, and they believe that it's necessary for the Department of Health Services to really direct the effort in terms of managing this crisis. So that's what they're arguing, and they're asking that the court sustain the authority of the Department of Health Services to issue the Safer at Home orders. So I'd be happy to, I'm going to just stop there and ask if anyone has any questions, and then ask if anyone would prefer that I not sign off on that brief.
Your Honor, if there's not a queue, I have a question. This is Riley. If there is a queue, I'll wait my turn.
Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, thank you. Counsel, I understood that the lawsuit was to challenge the executive, the governor's authority to do this, and not simply DHS. Does this, by the way, I'm fully supportive of this. What I am wondering is, does the amicus curiae brief address the governor's authority as the state executive to do this along with DHS? I assume it does, but I would like to know.
The governor is not a party to the case. The governor did not issue the orders. The orders were issued by Andrea Palm, who is the secretary designee.
Okay, that answers the question. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, it looks like Sid has a comment in there. Did you want to speak, Sid?
Yeah, I'd not be in favor until I read it.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments related to this?
If I may, Your Honor, this is Riley again. Counsel, what's the time frame within which they need to have an answer from us?
Tomorrow morning.
Well, is there some way that, and as much as I love Sid, is there some way we could have a vote on this or something at this point? And I understand the problem that it's not that nobody's had the chance to read it. The principle is extremely important in my mind. The executive should have the authority to do this. And just like forcing people to vote in the middle of a pandemic, I find the actions of the legislative majority just completely offensive in this instance. So I don't know if we can have a vote, with all due respect to Sid, and I mean that sincerely. But if they have to know by tomorrow morning, I'd like us to have the opportunity to take action on this tonight.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know how to solve that problem because it's not something that we were able to get on the agenda. This is something that came to my attention over the weekend, and you know, I discussed the matter with Mayor Swadley and Council President Hirsch yesterday and today. And again, I guess our thought was we didn't think the council would have the opportunity to vote on this because it's not on the agenda, but we thought that the mayor and the council president could individually or in their official capacity kind of sign off on the brief and represent the city. But what I'm being told now is no, they would want me to sign off on it as the city attorney. And I'm not comfortable doing that without the council's authorization.
Thank you. I appreciate the explanation. Sid, change your mind. That's it. Thanks.
Matt, is there a possibility that you can share the brief right now with the council that they can read as we're going through this meeting?
Yeah, let me do this. I'm going to email the draft that I received this morning from Attorney Paulson to Holly, and then ask Holly to email it out to all council members because I don't have everyone's email address. Holly, can you hear me? Is that okay?
Yes, I can hear you. I think I can do that.
Okay, I will email it to Holly now, and then maybe if people have a chance to scroll through it again, it's not even final yet. It's the draft in its form as of this morning, but I think you'll be able to see at least what the tenor of the brief is. So I'll forward that.
Thank you.
Mayor, thank you, Matt. Mayor, because of this is such a different circumstance, could we revisit communications at the end of the meeting today, just to, you know, if people have a chance to kind of briefly look at the brief, and then we can just.
We can do that. So we'll do other communications and then we'll come back to it. And I have Jean was next, and then I have Brett, and then Ben after that.
Just finishing up the comments about this brief. Regina and Mayor Swadley, Tim, have you guys had a chance to read this brief?
Briefly read the brief.
Mayor Swadley?
Yeah, we read it this afternoon.
I'm hoping you guys could share your thoughts at the end of the meeting with us as well, since you had a chance to sit with it. If you're open to doing that, I know I'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you. Brett was next.
No, actually, that was, I have a communication, and I apologize. I was just finishing up the, just didn't want you to be surprised. I wanted to hear your guys' opinion. The nice communications came in via social media, via email, via various places, and people were concerned about the vote that took place in April, and thinking ahead to November. And there's been lots of thoughts about that. And successfully in Milwaukee, a new alderwoman brought a proposal to the Milwaukee Common Council, who voted in favor of a mail-in vote in November. And a few people asked that question about Stoughton. And I know that it's being talked about at numerous levels of government, statewide, federal funds coming, you name it. But what we would like to do is on the Community Affairs and Council Policy Committee, we would like to undertake this issue and possibly bring forth a resolution to look at what our voting will be in November. I just wanted to make people aware that we appreciate all of the input and the concerns around the COVID-19 precautions and the risks people had to take to vote. And we would like to be proactive.
Okay, thank you. You might want to adjust your screen. I'm seeing more of the ceiling than you.
Thanks, Tim. I'm
All
going
right.
to get on the laptop shortly.
All right, now I see a little better. It's just a little shaky.
Sorry.
Alderperson Schumacher was next.
All right, so I can also concur with Gene that I've had discussions with people about the vote in there, and we talked about it briefly and at the very end of Finance Committee, but I think in CACP is definitely a good place for that to come up. So my communication then is in my other capacity of what I do for my living in making some of the virus test kit parts. I've learned that at least in last week, as far as by last week, that Promega had created the equivalent of 100 million test kits out
Wow.
to everybody. So that's just in our custom orders, then that hasn't even accounted for the number that we've sent out for more larger business orders. So we are working as fast as we can to get as much testing out to pretty much everyone in the world. That was
Thank
all I
you.
had.
All right, thank you. Alderperson Hiley was next.
Yeah, I just there were a few news stories about some federal goings on that I wanted to comment on. There are a few politicians on the federal level, especially the one in charge of the Senate, who are talking about cutting off state and local funding during the crisis. They think that this is as much as we need to keep providing essential services. And I know most people on the call know this, but I want to make it clear on public record that cities and states don't have the same toolbox to keep funding essential services, especially during a crisis in which we are all in it together. We're bound to have a balanced budget, and we're limited in the ways we can raise funds. And the federal government does not have those constraints. So it's a very important thing to keep an eye on.
Thank you, Alderperson Hiley. Does anybody else want to speak during communications? Okay, hearing none, we can move on and we can come back to that other item later if we'd like.
Hey, Tim?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we would have it in our the possibility to suspend our rule, given the nature of the timing. Suspend our rule that even though it's not noticed, and by 2/3 to have a suspension of the rule and then a vote on this specific item.
I don't think we
I don't think you can, it's statutory.
for
Yeah, this is a state law, not a local rule.
Okay, so,
Jim?
yes,
Yeah, I'm on. Sorry, this is Greg. I'm just wondering if, Matt, if we could just do a straw poll, something like that, would that be breaking the rules?
Well, in a way, I'm trying to walk a real fine line here by asking. I'm suggesting that if no one has any objection to me signing the brief, then I'll proceed to do that. But if anyone would have any objection, then I wouldn't. But beyond that, I think any kind of voting or straw polling, I think is farther than I'd be willing to go.
So is our silence, would that be interpreted as being unanimous consent?
Your silence would be interpreted as not objecting to me signing the brief.
Okay, so silence for what, 10 seconds?
Well, we're gonna have to revisit this issue after Sid has had a chance to look at the brief, which Holly has now sent out to everyone.
Okay.
Can we break for like 3 minutes to have people read that brief? Would that be allowed?
We can do that. I can share it on the screen as well.
That would be nice.
All right. Speak and you shall receive. You want to walk us through it, Matt?
Read the email, but if you think it's too much work to go in and out,
They're not sending it here.
you could check.
No, it didn't go there. So go,
Oh,
you're in it?
there's this brief. Oh, okay. Thank you. I think that could.
I think it'll be easier if people just scroll through it on their own
Okay,
than if I try and walk through it.
all right. And I'll scroll through it on the screen, so if people are watching, they can see it.
Yeah, where's the refill bottle for this?
Is that the end of it, Tim?
This is Jean Legacki, and being a healthcare provider, may I say I'm very, very happy to read this document. I very quickly scanned the first two sections, and I agree to this conclusion. I urge us to not stand in the way of Attorney Dragney signing off.
I would be in total agreement with that, Gene.
We can put it down. Is that the end, Tim?
It's page 15 of 22.
Okay,
Has everyone had a chance to scroll through it?
Yes.
Pretty well.
Sid, have you had a chance to scroll through it?
I'm at conclusion right now.
Okay.
And how would this go against the, like recently the U.S. or the Attorney General's idea about looking into civil liberties violations based on,
Who
I
cares?
think it was the Missouri case where they blocked the church from allowing them. So would this go against that sort of thing if the federal government decides they want to mount a response against it?
This is really limited to the authority that the Department of Health Services in Wisconsin has to issue the kinds of orders that we are operating under today. It does not speak to the authority that the federal government would have to attempt to intervene in those in an individual case. And honestly, I'm not prepared to speak to that. It's not something that I'm really prepared to speak to tonight. But this case and this brief does not address that issue.
Okay.
Okay, Tim?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I've read it. I haven't studied it. I'd like to study it at some point, but I'm gonna remain silent.
All right, so does anyone have an objection that they'd like to express now? Going once, going twice, hearing no
Thank you,
objection.
Matt.
Thank you, I'm sorry you had to deal with that.
Thank you for going
Thank
forward, Matt.
Okay, the next item is public comment period. And I believe there's one person that wished to speak tonight. Sid, is Sharon present?
I'm gonna hand it over to her.
Okay.
Thank you. My name
Hey,
is Sharon.
Sharon.
Hello, my name is Sharon Mason Boersma. I live at 243 East McKinley Street, Stoughton. And thank you for your attention tonight. I bring to your attention the status of a couple of items that I know have been major discussion points for some of the members and employers of city government. The Whitewater Park and the newly constructed sidewalk proposals. Currently, I and others have from the city are very concerned about how and what kind of economic circumstances will be taking place for residents and business owners after the pandemic crisis is lifted and people's livelihood gets back to some kind of normalcy. Right now, we don't have a crystal ball, but we know it may take a long time. Given this unforeseen happening that we did not know would be so devastating for many, which may not disappear for a while, the creation of a Whitewater Park and the new sidewalk proposal should be shifted by city leaders for more immediate priorities. I believe top priority would be to focus on ways to support city services, the schools, nonprofits, small and commercial businesses for receiving fiscal help and financial support with information to do so, and move forward with federal, state, and county governments. As a resident of Stoughton, I believe that it will take many months before people get back to a level of stabilization. I think that is true for those that were doing fairly well at their jobs, at home, with their families, even prior to the pandemic. This crisis has been devastating for many at all income levels. I appreciate city leaders and government to consider first and foremost, what are the priorities of the city for expenses and what will be the most beneficial for the infrastructure of our community and its residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Mhm.
Okay. And there's nobody else signed up to speak. So I'd like to move to the consent agenda. We have some minutes from the previous two meetings in there. I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Move to approve.
I heard a motion by Jensen and was it a second by Hiley?
Sure.
All right. Would anybody like anything removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The consent agenda carries. What I'd like to do is shift to new business first, and then we'll come back to the old business. And for new business, we want to start with item number 14. We have our Dave Ferris from Ellers, our financial consultant, is on the line here. And we'll let Dave walk us through something. Who should I make the presenter here, David or Jamin?
I'm on my phone, so Dave, are you set up to be able to present?
If not, I can walk it, I can follow along. Dave's muted right now.
Sorry about that. You know, if you want me to run it, that way I can at least show you what page I'm on. Unfortunately, it didn't help for the people on the phones, but.
You want me to turn it over to you?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. The screen is yours. The floor is yours.
Oh, let's see. I've got the packet, right? Are you giving me the packet like you did at the last meeting? Or am I running it off of mine?
You can run it off of yours or I can run it for you. Do you have a preference?
Oh, I was thinking last week you had me scroll through the menu, but why don't you run it? Because I don't have it up on my screen.
Okay.
I'll just
right.
have to tell you. Let me see here. For some odd reason, there was another meeting where I was actually at, and they did not want to turn over anything to me. So
it'll just take me a second to get it back up here.
yeah, I'm gonna grab the project plan here quick.
There it is. So the first thing we see here is the resolution.
Here we go. So I'm going to go through the project plan like I did for the Joint Review Board and the Planning Commission.
Okay.
So if you want to start with that first page of the I'm going to have you go to page 4 of our document, which
All
would
right.
have a summary of findings on it. Okay.
Here we go.
Okay. So just a little summary of where we've been. Last week, I guess Thursday night, we had a joint review board where we organized the joint review board, summarized the project plan, and then set up, basically gave them what their duties were, and also set up a meeting for the final joint review board meeting, which is May 20th at 5:30. We went through, basically, when we went through the requirements, the criteria that the joint review board needed to take into consideration, you know, there's a couple of criteria. The one is the but for. I'm sure you've heard that a number of times, but without full development, it's likely that the TID would not achieve the original goals of the district. The additional costs that are being considered in the amendment were not fully known at that time. So they've become determined at this point and are necessary to fulfill the implementation of the project plan. And as you know, you hired Frank Roman consultant from our office at Ellers to do a review of the pro forma, which is really a test for the but-for, and he reported to you that the need for TIF was definitely something that should be considered. As far as economic benefits of amending the district, which is criteria 2, the increments that are going to be projected are sufficient to cover the additional costs that are considered within the plan, and that additional development would provide approximately 206 residential units, providing housing for approximately 108 additional school-age children that would attend the Stoughton area school district. So because TID 7's development would unlikely take place or in the same manner or time period without TIF, and because it generates economic development sufficient to compensate for the additional costs, the benefits outweigh the anticipated tax increments to be paid by the owners of the property in the overlying taxing jurisdictions. On page, let's see, where are we at here?
I'm on 4.5.
Okay, so back on, trying to see where it is. Okay. On 3, a little bit about the district. Some of this you may know. The district was originally created on November 11th of 2014 as a mixed-use district. This is the first amendment to the district, and the district can be amended 4 times total over the life of the district. The purpose of this amendment is to add proposed additional project costs. There is no territory being added to this district at this time. The total proposed project cost to be added is $11.4 million, and this amendment allows for costs to be incurred within what's called the 1/2 mile radius. The expenditure period for the district ends on November 11th, 2029. That has not changed and does not change. On page, let's see if I can see this. Unfortunately, I can't read with my glasses on, so that makes it a little more difficult. The valuation, I'll just read this because it's in there. It's in the project plan around page 3 or 4. As of 1/1/19, the valuation of TID 7 is at $24,200,000 approximately. With the proposed project costs that are in this amendment, the district has projected average annual valuation growth of about 20%, assuming that all the project costs are undertaken. If you were only considering where the TIF is now with what development is related to phase 1, and considering that those projects in phase 1 were completed, the district would have been closed in about 2025 or 9 years earlier. If we add this amendment, you consider this amendment and assume that all the projects that are within this plan are undertaken, and that the appreciation and the value of the property is achieved, as I discussed a little bit ago, it is projected that the district would close about 3 years later in 2028 successfully. On page 13 of the project plan, sorry, your project plan, this is just a map that shows the boundaries as well as the projects that will be undertaken. There's a color coding as far as the year that they potentially would take place, as well as some lettering that tells what those projects are. On page 16, we've included basically a little historical information about phase 1. This is the original project plan in phase 1. You've already approved that. This is the numbers that were in that project plan. And then on the next page, on page 17, is how things have occurred through 12/31/19. At this point, you have about $4.5 million of capital and some administrative costs. The project plan, when you approved it a couple years ago, was about $5.2 million for those items. So we have not spent up to that budget at this time. So the other thing that is a real positive is the fund balance as of 12/31/19 is $438,000, and you'll see later in the projection that that never goes negative based on the growth that's in the projection. Let's see here. Page 18. So page 18 is the new amendment project. So these are these are what you're considering in this project plan. The costs that were the 7.4 million that I showed you earlier are past costs. So when we're talking about the amendment and what this is about, this schedule is really kind of a consideration of some of the projects that could be undertaken and are included in the project plan, so that if you decide on some of these projects that are not set in stone as to what's going to be done, that you at least have the ability to consider those because you put them in here. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do these all, but these are some projects that may be beneficial to the district and can be considered. Some of these can be considered at a later date on whether the city is interested in taking these on. So just to kind of give you a little update on what this schedule has, columns 1, 3, and 5 are project costs that are reasonably expected to be undertaken. There's a developer finance portion. Those projects are mostly the on-site projects and are reimbursed through a municipal revenue obligation that I believe you have been working through lately. The TID or city related projects will be considered when cash becomes available in the TIF fund, and mostly are including off-site costs, kind of half-mile rule costs, administration and financing costs. The TBD columns, or the 2nd, 4th, and 6th columns, are project costs that may be considered in the future if you have available funds within the TID and at the city's discretion, and they would include additional infrastructure projects and a potential land purchase. On pages 22 and 23, let's start with 22. This is the development assumptions. The orange column, let's see here, maybe one page before that. There you go. That's what. So the orange column on this schedule is what has actually happened. The Department of Revenue has certified these values. These are what are in the ground and generating tax revenue for the district right now. There are a couple more phase 1 projects that still have to be undertaken. As you know, the senior housing is done, or pretty much done. The hotel is in progress, and then there's the developer has a couple more retail related sites that have potential growth in the future as well to finish up phase 1. The phase 2 is the part of the amendment that you're looking at right now. These are single family, traditional neighborhood, multifamily, and condo residential dwellings. The amounts that are in those columns for phase 2 add up to about $66.5 million of value, and are what are used to pay for things like the potential MRO and some city costs that you may consider undertaking having to do with the half-mile rule projects. So if, as I talked about earlier, if all the projects are undertaken and the appreciation occurs as is listed here, it's about a 20% appreciation on an annual basis. On page 23, which is really small on my screen, so it's probably going to be really small on yours. This is our tax increment projection. So those values coming from the previous screen, which also totaled $113 million of value, which is the phase 1 and phase 2 together. When you calculate those across using the tax rate that comes with the annual tax increment worksheet that the city prepares each, probably November, December-ish, you take the value times the rate and you get the increment. So the amounts that are in the first 4 years are actual revenues that are hitting or have hit or are hitting the city's books, and then the rest are the projection based on those values being on the ground going forward. So if everything happens as we talked about, all those residential units go in, at the end you'll be collecting somewhere around $2.6 million annually, and if we stayed open to the bitter end, you would collect about $33 million of increment in this district. On page 24, oops. Yeah, I'm one page past that now, sorry. Okay, so this schedule is the $66.5 million of new phase 2 residential values calculating into the increment column. So taking those tax rates that were on that last sheet that I was talking about, taking just the phase 2 amounts, that's the amount of increment that would be generated if those or if those dwellings go in as scheduled on that developer assumption sheet. Those numbers, those revenues would be used to pay for the MRO that you are considering, and then potentially the capital outlay, which is mostly the half-mile rule projects that the city would be undertaking, as well as a little bit of administration. As you can see, the phase 2 projects don't really cash flow until we get a couple of years down the road, like 2027. We start having a lot of positive increments, and we actually pay off all the MRO and capital projects by 2030, just looking at phase 2 revenues and phase 2 costs. On the next sheet, you'll see if we combine the original district phase 1 with phase 2, you'll see that that we have that $33 million that we probably will never need all that, because as you can see with the yellow bar on the right side, that's the year that this is projecting that you would close. So, we wouldn't collect anything after that year. So we have, the increment being generated that we went through on the one increment worksheet. We have a little bit of interest income. There's some miscellaneous revenues that go into this. There were some borrowing proceeds from phase 1 that paid for the capital improvements that are listed in 2015 through 2018. The first issue that you took out was just a note anticipation note with the anticipation that you'd put that into permanent financing, which you did so in 2018, and that is the bigger repayment amount. So that's basically the repayment schedule for all the capital improvements that you installed from 15 through 18. So then the phase, there's a phase 1 MRO that is out there for about $550,000 that is scheduled to start this year per the projection. And then the phase 2 MRO is what I showed you on the last sheet. Those are coming into here, as well as those capital improvements that the city could undertake. If you take all of the revenues that are generated against these projects, which we are talking about everything being undertaken in this projection, you would basically have positive cash flow every year. A couple that don't cash flow completely, but you have cumulative fund balance available that you're able to cover any year where there's a shortfall. So, I think some of the discussion when you and Frank was out, when I was out that time for the sewer borrowing, was that there would be some potential usage of phase 1 fund balance to help fund some of the phase 2 development. So if everything goes as planned, this would have the district closing in 2028, and that's still quite a few years earlier than the final closeout period. Let's see, the last thing that I'll talk about a little bit is, like I said last week, we have the Joint Review Board and the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission approved the resolution for the TIF district unanimously. If with the Plan Commission approval, and if the city decides to approve the TIF amendment as well, then the Joint Review Board will meet, as I talked about on May 20th, to consider the final approval. And if that were to occur, then about 60 days later, within the 60 days after that approval, Ellers would prepare all the documents to go to the DOR and submit them. That's all I have right now. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything.
All right, are there any questions or comments?
I have 2 questions.
Sure, Matt, go ahead.
Dave, on the list of on the summary of the new costs,
yes,
the on-site 2020 costs, on-site projects totaling $3 million. Am I right in understanding that's the $3 million that that we're looking at using the municipal revenue obligation to finance?
I think maybe,
It's not.
I believe that's what it is, but I think I would defer that answer either to Jamin or to the forward development person.
Yeah, that's correct, Matt. That's part of the MRO. And that's obviously just the principal amount. When you work your way down to page 25 of the plan amendment itself, that includes the phase 2 MRO of $3 million plus the forecasted interest, obviously depending on the pay down period.
Okay. So my second question is this. Is there an opportunity in this amendment, given this list of project costs, to use any of the TIF funding to finance wetland restoration work within the district? Would that be an eligible cost anywhere in here?
The way we design this as of right now, we weren't aware of any wetland cost, preservation costs. So unless you would feel comfortable squeezing it into, let me find the page 18 into one of those categories, which just glancing at it, I struggle to do. But if you could find justification for squeezing it into one of those buckets, potentially yes. But again, that wasn't in the scope of the amendment that we worked through.
Would it be possible tonight for the council, if the council so desired, to tweak the language here on page 18? For example, under on-site costs future, where it says parks and recreation, could we, for example, say parks and recreation and wetland restoration work? And then have the council approve it with that change if the council so desired.
I would say, as long as we're not going to change the dollar amounts, do we know a cost associated with this?
Not yet.
Okay. The only, and this is more of a Matt and potentially Dave question, is the fact that this it's been seen by the JRB, but they did not decide upon it. Plan Commission decided on this last week and voted to approve it. What does that do to that decision?
Well, so here's my take on that. I don't believe that the council is limited at this point to only what the Plan Commission recommended. If the council wanted to make an adjustment tonight, I think it could do that legally. And as you say, the Joint Review Board has not yet voted on this, but there's a potential that the council may want to use TIF funding to deal with some wetland restoration work here. I don't know for sure if that's going to be something the council doesn't want to do, but I would think this is our opportunity to at least create that opportunity without having to go through and amend the district again later, if that's what the council decides to do. That's why I'm raising it. I'm only raising it now because this is an issue that's just come up quite recently, and the possibility of using TIF funding is something that we may be discussing.
Well, and the one thing that I think I would probably have to look at is to see if we could add the wording, if there's wording that's specific to wetland restoration, that we need to add that back in before that final approval. So I would guess that if the council is interested and the city attorney agrees, that we could probably have you approve some kind of adjustment to these schedules and get the proper wording in if there is a necessary wording to allow it.
Okay, so yep. So just for the council's information, then I think we're going to be talking more about wetland restoration later, and you have an opportunity now when you're approving this resolution. If you want to approve the resolution with an amendment that authorizes adjusting the list of eligible project costs to include an estimated amount for wetland restoration. Now would be an opportunity to do that.
I'd make that motion. This is Lisa.
Second, Harley.
You beat me to it, Ben.
Okay, you're gonna have to work with Holly on the language, Matt.
Yep.
All right, so.
Oh, you mean for the motion?
Yeah, well, we didn't actually have a regular motion on the floor.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. Okay, let me go to the resolution. Hold on.
Yeah, I'll go back to the resolution, but when we get to that point and we make a motion, then somebody could make that amendment.
Okay.
As we're reading through that, I just have a question for Dave. Do you think we should build in some additional dollar amounts? You know, obviously not shorting ourselves, but and not knowing what the cost could potentially be. Do you think we should at least set a number?
Well, we'll need that for the joint review board to finalize this. So, I mean, we need something in there, or else you just have to work within the dollar budget that you have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and so tonight the council can consider two things. One, whether to add as a descriptor, you know, wetland restoration work, and second, whether to increase the dollars available under the plan to accommodate that. I understand we don't have a clear cost estimate yet. With these TIF plans, though, the costs that are in the plan are recognized as estimated costs. We're not required to hit them exactly on the money. Based on the discussion that I've participated in the last day or so, I would suggest considering, if you're going to add wetland work, something like another $100,000. But again, when we get to the resolution, we can talk about that.
Okay. All right, would somebody like to make a motion on the resolution as it stands, and then we can discuss potentially amending it after that?
Yes, Tim, I'll make, excuse me, the motion to accept the resolution as presented.
Was there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Alderperson Boersma. And did somebody want to make the amendment now?
So I'll make the amendment to include the verbiage for wetland restoration funds
Second.
based on Matt's recommendation.
Okay, and I think that was seconded by Alderperson Hiley.
Yep. Lisa, do you want to add 100,000 to that? You want to add the money in?
Good idea. Yes, please.
Okay. So Matt, you'll work with Holly and David and Jamin on the actual language? Is that what you want
Yes.
to do?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments on the amendment?
Oh, I have one question, and that is, to make it more appealing, could it be that we say not to exceed $100,000?
The way these project plan works is you simply provide an estimated cost. You don't need to say, you know, not to exceed, or again, it's recognized from a legal standpoint that it is an estimate.
We don't have an estimate.
Let me just say this, you're also not deciding to spend the money at this point. You can make that decision later as to whether to spend it, how much to spend. That will be a later decision.
So Matt, when do we get the estimate, or where do we get the estimate then?
We'll be talking more about that later.
All right.
Okay, I think I saw Regina, were you trying to speak to the amendment?
No, I fully support this, and as Matt alluded to, we have more information to discuss later regarding this, and more information coming later this week.
Okay, anybody else have any comments on the amendment? Hearing none, all in favor of the amendment, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the amendment carries, so that takes us back to the resolution as amended. Any questions or comments on the resolution as amended? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. Okay, thanks, David.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, so we're gonna go back to item number 8, new business, which is sidewalk installation policy. And that came from Public Works. Alderperson Reeves, would you like to introduce this?
Sure, thank you. Resolution 72, 2020 sidewalk installation policy. And Public Works recommended approval on April 16th. And I so move.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Alderperson Hunt. Alderperson Reeves, do you want to walk us through this, or are you going to hand this one off?
Well, I'll mention a couple highlights and let Director Shield fill in the blanks, but it added language to include or update the collector streets, and also tightened up added some language. Council's always had the authority to deviate from policy when it comes to the sidewalks and, the installation on both sides. But the changes in the language spell out specifically that council may approve a deviation from policy. Director Shield, maybe you have something to add that I missed?
I think that highlights the discussion and the characterization of the changes to the policy. I would note there's one typo in the first whereas clause. There's a lone T right after the that should be removed.
Mayor Swadley?
Go ahead, Alderperson Boersma.
Okay, so I presented a policy change to this policy of the sidewalk insulation, and this matched pretty well with what I said. I did put in a clause in my proposal that limited the total expenditure for a constituent to not exceed $2,000, and that was not included in this particular policy. And I was told that Public Works said it'll be more proper for me to bring that up, the $2,000 limit at finance. That has not been done at this point. The second thing I'd like to say is that I think this was unanimous when we took the vote at Public Works. However, there was some question about whether or not we had input from everybody who needed to have input to include at that point Alder Riley, who had said that he was going to propose some additional items and maybe some proviso that these are the guidelines as to how we can deviate from our policy of sidewalks on both sides. So although I voted for this, positively, in speaking to Alder Riley, I know that he had not presented what he wanted to present to Public Works. So I just wanted to tell people about that there has been some question as to whether or not it's adequately stated how we can deviate from a policy and give especially our city staff direction. So that's all I need to say.
Your Honor, if I may, this is Alder Riley.
Go ahead.
Thank you. A couple of things. One, Alderperson Reed said the city has always had discretion to deviate from policy. Is that actually articulated somewhere specifically or not? Do we know?
Well,
I
it
think
is
we have
now.
that authority. Sorry, please, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. So it now, it was not specifically, and Director Shield, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was not specifically in the language before. But now what it says, during design, special construction issues may be identified that may warrant special consideration. In those situations, the Common Council may approve a deviation from the strict adherence to this policy. So that's the language as it stands in the revision.
All right, so here's my concern. One, if we had fairly broad discretion, which I would argue we do and should have in these instances, because the policy should not dictate what we do, we should dictate how we apply the policy. I'm not certain why we would want this language at this time. It seems to me that this language may in fact further restrict the circumstances under which we as a council can decide how and when to apply the general 1997 policy. So I have a little bit of a concern here that this is well intended, and I know it is, but I tend to think it might further limit, given the language during design, special construction issues may be identified that may warrant special consideration. It seems to me then the only time this council would have authority to deviate from this policy, which of course, as you know, I think is a god-awful policy, but in any event, the only time we would have any authority whatsoever would be if there are special construction issues identified that may warrant special consideration. Right now, we have broader authority than that, even though it's not articulated, because that's part of our job. So I have that concern. With respect to what Alder Boersma said, he is right. And I think the reason he's raising this is because we want to make sure that this does not foreclose further addressing amendments to that policy. I am going to submit some written request revision, something for Public Works to consider, that are going to have various factors that Public Works and the council are to consider and apply when retrofitting sidewalks in older neighborhoods. There's no issue with regard to newer developments, etc. There's no issue with respect to collector streets, etc. But there are some real issues when you start tearing up older neighborhoods that did not have sidewalks and throwing them in there in blind devotion to a policy. So one, I don't like this language because I think, frankly, it limits our discretion. And then two, I want to make sure that there's no thought that this is it and we cannot bring further requests for further revisions to this policy. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Alderperson Lagaki was next.
Alderperson Riley, I went to the Public Works meeting shortly after the meetings about the historic neighborhood over in your district. And I just wanted to understand more of the process. And I actually think that Public Works is wanting to keep this latitude that we have about not applying that we must have both sides, a sidewalk on both sides every single time in every single place. And so at that meeting, the special construction issues was discussed quite a bit. So I feel that their intent was trying to meet what you and I were trying to accomplish for the historic nature of your neighborhood. I'm not sure if the language special construction issues is the way to go, since we already have it, but I just wanted to share that I felt that they wanted to keep that latitude available, and that gave me some pause. So I'm not certain how I feel about this new draft, but I guess I just wanted to put out there that at that meeting, I really feel that they we were of similar minds, but for whatever reason, I'm not sure why we're not grabbing it in this policy. Though I do like, and also say that it now says a plan and policy, just policy. It's meant to be a planning document as well.
May I follow, Mayor?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. A couple of things. One, as I said, I have no doubt that this is well-intentioned because I think some of this came from Alderperson Boersma. So I'm not questioning the intentions here. I'm questioning the practical effect of the language. And language, as we all know, is terribly important when you are dealing with ordinances or policies or whatever. Again, Alder Reeves started her discussion by saying we've always had discretion to deal with these things. I agree with her. I believe we have. So if we are now limiting that to this language, special construction considerations, how is that defined? How do we define that? What does that mean? And does that foreclose any consideration for environmental concerns? Does it foreclose any consideration for economic concerns? Should we be spending this money when the world is basically coming to an end as we know it, at least right now? There are any number of concerns that the council should have the right to at least consider. Some of those, frankly, should actually, in my opinion, be articulated specifically in this policy, which is again something I am going to prepare and present to Public Works for their consideration and to bring to the council, hopefully, ultimately. But I am concerned that as well-intentioned as this language may be, it is restrictive in nature. Unless we are going to have a rather expansive definition of what special construction, whatever, means, it's a problem. It's problematic language. That's my feeling on this. So I have real concerns about it. And also, I want to make sure that there is no thought that if this were to pass tonight, that it forecloses further efforts to amend this policy. So that's it.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to comment?
I guess I would. This is Regina. I guess if it seems to be some more discussion that needs to be had with this policy, I think it might need to be sent back to Public Works so Elder Riley can have his input so we don't have to bring it back and have it amended. I think it might just be good just to send it back and incorporate and have a discussion about what Alderperson Riley wants to change in it now as opposed to bringing it back over and over and over again. So that's what I would propose is send it back.
So I guess
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
My question would be is if the council wants to postpone it, I'm okay with that. And I want to ask Director Shield, you know, if we're going to change the policy for the next year's projects, when would we realistically want to have that completed so we don't run into trying to deal with two policies at the time when we're planning construction?
I would recommend it be completed by the middle of summer so that we're in preparation for the 2021 projects, if there's any enumerated for next year.
That sounds good to me.
Yes, I would then recommend that we send it back to Public Works with it being reintroduced to council no later than July 15th.
Well, that's fine as long as Public Works will allow it to be heard and will actually allow it to go to council. That's fine.
Well, when they reorganize, they'll have a new chair and it'll be a new day. So hopefully they'll, yeah, and we look forward to your participation. Is there a second on that?
I'll second that.
I second.
Okay. I heard a second from Schumacher. Any more discussion? I see Jean up there. Did you have something you want to add?
No, nope.
Oh, okay.
I'm again.
All right. Anybody else have any thoughts about sending this back to committee? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. We'll see you at Public Works.
Groovy. Can't wait.
Item number 6 is coming from Public Works for a first reading. Alderperson Reeves.
Right, ordinance 6-2020, repealing and recreating sections 10-317 and 10-318 of the Stoughton Municipal Code relating to property maintenance and outdoor storage. And this is the first reading.
Does anybody have any initial questions? Otherwise, this will be back in a couple weeks. Anything you want to add, Lisa?
Just that it establishes a minimum standard for outdoor areas and exterior structures within the city of Stoughton. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Director Shield, but this is an ordinance that's just kind of, well, the whole thing was not repealed, correct? Just some sections. Help me out with that, please.
Yeah, I think there's a red line version in the packet, but there's certain aspects of it that were repealed and recreating new, but there are certainly remnants of the existing that were carried forward into the revision.
Are there any initial, oh, go ahead. Alderperson Wagaki.
Thank you. Just an initial question. Was this the policy that if people wanted to start planting out their terraces or their boulevards, the area between the street and a sidewalk?
No.
Thank you. In your wisdom, Rodney, if you have a minute to let me know what policy that might be, I just appreciate knowing that. Thank you for.
Sure.
Okay, so this one will be back at the next council meeting. Then, if you have any questions,
I had a question in the chat.
Oh, shoot, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, word that stuck out to me in restrictions on outdoor storage, which is 318 B2, is junk. I'm wondering if junk is specific enough or legally defined enough to prohibit, or whether we want to be more specific about that.
This is Matt. This is a very difficult problem in terms from a definitional standpoint. Certainly something we discussed. And junk is often, and in the eyes of the dictionary, is it in the eyes of the beholder, or and so I acknowledge that it's difficult from a definitional standpoint, but we don't have a better word. But if anyone on the council does, I'm all ears.
Fair enough.
All right. If you have any other specific questions, I would direct them to either Director Shield or Aber, and it'll come back. They're in the process of reorganizing, so we haven't established a chairperson yet, but we know who's going to be on the committee. So otherwise, we'll see this one in 2 weeks. Ordinance 7 also comes from Public Works. Alderperson Reeves for a first reading.
All right, thank you. Ordinance 7-2020, creating Chapter 63 relating to wireless telecommunications facilities in the right-of-way, and this is a first reading.
Matt, would you like to speak to this one?
I'll just briefly, so this ordinance is intended to deal with what I understand to be called kind of small wireless infrastructure that we may need to be dealing with at a local level as the telecommunications industry starts to build it out. We are subject to limitations under state and federal law in terms of what our regulatory authority is in this area. And the purpose of this ordinance is to use the authority that we still do have to manage the potential installation and build out of small wireless facilities. It's highly technical stuff. I'm not really in a position to get too deep into the weeds with you tonight. I guess what I would ask is if anyone on the council does between now and the second reading, if you have a specific question or concern, it would be really helpful to me if you would send me an email telling me that ahead of time so that I have a chance to prepare for that, because as I say, this is a highly technical. There's a lot here. It took a lot of time to kind of get everything put together, and it will be difficult for me to shoot from the hip on it.
Matt, if I may, I have a question because I know this is one of the things that we were talking in utilities is this addressing like communities with the 5G possibly coming in and communities don't have a say of whether or not they want it or not? And how do we put that in language that doesn't spell out exactly discriminatory, but that the council and different factors of different committees would have a say into whether or not we would accept that. I know I've been getting a lot of emails from constituents who are concerned about it with respect to health issues. And I guess I want us to make sure that we are covered, that we actually are able to discuss the matter before deciding whether or not that would be something that we would want.
Regina, I was thinking about something. Oh, you want to go ahead, Matt?
Go ahead.
I was thinking along the lines of where something like that could be added in, because I was concerned about that possibility as well. And I don't know whether FCC or the state agency has any possibility of any regulation on this, but in section 63-6 in the application section of this, and then within that, the sub item 4. So within the communications that they have to the neighbors within the 300 feet of the facility, could the letter, or not letter, the number 4 communication item be that they have to disclose what bandwidth they're operating in and at what wattage?
Yeah, but disclosing it, and if somebody doesn't want it, they're stuck with it at that point then.
True,
Right?
but they would, at least the neighbors would have an opportunity, if they're being notified ahead of time, that they would have an opportunity to lodge a complaint for it.
Well, let me make sure. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, but is the question whether the city would have the authority to prevent the installation of like 5G infrastructure?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know the answer to that. I suspect the answer is no, but I can note that and try and address that at the next meeting.
I think it's really important because I think right now the jury is out of whether or not it might cause some health problems, and I think the community should be able to decide whether or not that's something that they want to undertake or not. They shouldn't just be forced to have it.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, as I understand it, the purpose of this ordinance is to try and maximize the limited authority that the city does have to regulate in this area. The state and the federal government have, to a large extent, preempted our authority locally. But I will make a note that you're interested in understanding whether the city would have the authority to prevent or regulate the build out of 5G.
So
right, because
relevant
there is
is
one part in here that any permits are exempt if they are covering the same footprint. And so if the 5G for some reason is the same footprint that the company already has, then we definitely don't have any say. So that is one area that I think we have to kind of change, that, I wouldn't say that any footprint that's the same is automatically in. You have to I would like to see that we actually have some say within that. And I can't find where that is talking about.
I think what I'm going to suggest is, so this ordinance was actually commissioned by the League of Wisconsin Municipality initially, prepared by the Boardman firm, Anita Galucci. She does a lot of work already with Stoughton Utilities. She's the real expert on this stuff. And then we took the work they did and then tailored it for the city of Stoughton. If we're going to be getting into these kinds of questions on this, frankly, I might need to suggest that we ask Anita to attend the meeting to address these questions, because frankly, it would take me more time to do the legal research to be ready to address this than it's worth in terms of educating me on it. So I'll talk to the mayor and Brett offline and see how they want to handle it. But I think the answer is going to be you don't have that authority, but I'm not the one who knows all the ins and outs of this stuff.
Mayor, this want to be the bearer of bad news, do you?
Well, I'm happy to do it if I just don't want to get it wrong.
All right. So it looks like Brett's up, and then I think Ben has a question too, Brett, when you're done.
Mayor, can you hear me?
Go ahead, or is that Fred?
I think it was Director Aber who was trying to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Brett.
Okay. Yeah, you had it up on the screen just a moment ago. 63-7 D13 talks about radio frequency emissions, and essentially they're all regulated by the FCC. And Matt kind of touched on, we have very limited authority to regulate them when they come into our community. So it's pretty broad in 13, but that's basically it when it comes to regulation. It's basically by the FCC, and the local authority really has no control. But I think Matt's going to look into that and how much control he may have, but I think it's pretty limited.
Okay. Yep. And then Ben, did you have a question? And then Fred is after you.
Just wanted to say, if anyone's interested, the relevant state law is 2019 Wisconsin Act 14. It's talking about what fees we can charge, what right of access, permitting process. I wouldn't be surprised if it was written by the industry itself. But that's kind of what we're dealing with. I think we're pretty locked down on any sort of things we can do on this.
Okay. Alderperson Hunt, did you have a comment? And then Schumacher after you.
No, actually, I think everything got covered pretty well, and I'm just fine.
Okay, thank you. Alderperson Schumacher.
And mine would still be just at bare minimum on the notification to people within the 300 feet of it, that at least, I mean, because if they're going to have the application in there, they're already going to have the frequency with which they're going to be broadcasting at, and at what power they're going to be broadcasting at. I mean, at least the neighbors within the immediate area of it would have the knowledge of what they have or what's going to be around them.
So you're interested in knowing, you're asking whether we can require an applicant to disclose and notify people within 300 feet of what frequency and power they're broadcasting at or using?
Yep, and they're already notifying them anyway, so this would be one line item that they would be taking off of their application to the FCC anyway.
Okay, again, it's not something I know the answer to, but we can try and get the answer before the next meeting.
Sure.
Okay. Alderperson Reeves, did you have another comment?
Yeah, just on the ordinance, just needing to change the dates for the first reading and the second reading. Those need to be corrected. And also just wanted to say kudos to Directors Zaber, Weiss, Shield, and the city attorneys for the work they did on this, because it has been very, very cumbersome, and it took a lot of time and effort. So thanks to them for all the work they put into this topic.
Thank you. Director Aber, did you have another comment?
Yeah, just thing to highlight is that we can establish preferred locations within the city. We'd prefer that they not go into residential areas and that these placed in more industrial or commercial settings. So we do have that latitude. However, they do have some legal recourse to put those other places if they cannot meet the service demands or they have no alternate, feasible location from a cost standpoint. But initially, when they come to us asking to place a small cell,
we are going to ask that they put these in industrial or commercial settings.
Good. Yes, thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Matt, what happens if, worst case scenario that they do put, 5G and they need to put it in some residential area, and then we found that people are getting sick? What recourse do we have at that point?
You mean as a city?
Yeah.
I don't know that the city would have any recourse. I suppose if people who are getting sick could prove that it was that infrastructure that was making them sick, they would have a claim. Personal injury claim, potentially a nuisance claim.
All right, any other comments tonight? Otherwise, this will be back in 2 weeks, and if you have any specific comments that you come up with between now and then, you can either pass them on to Attorney Dragney or Director Hebert. Okay, we'll go to the next item then, and that's R73, and that's coming from the Plan Commission, Alderperson Caravello.
Yep. This is Resolution R73 of 2020, approving a certified survey map to combine the parcels at 1008 Nygaard Street, Stoughton, Wisconsin, and I so move.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll second.
I think I heard Alderperson Hirsch. All right, Alderperson Caravello, do you want to walk us through this, or you want to hand it off, or a combination there?
I think since I don't control anything that I'm looking at or anybody else is looking at, I will hand it off to somebody else that can do that.
Mayor, if you could just scroll down to the map on this CSM, I think the description is quite self-explanatory. There's 2 parcels of land at the corner of Roby Road and Nygaard Street, Lot 6 and Lot 7. They're being combined into one single parcel as part of the CSM to allow for a commercial development that would utilize both parcels.
This map here?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I don't know why I can reduce it, maybe. There.
Ronnie, what is there now?
I'm sorry?
What is there now? What is on those lots?
It's vacant. So it's right across from Quick Trip, right at 51. It's on the south side of Roby at 51, between Nygaard and 51. So those 2 lots do not have anything constructed on them at this point.
Yeah, it's right next to Culver's. So basically, what they're trying to do is combine the 2 lots, and then it'll be a 2-unit retail establishment is, I think, the plans. And so this is a step in that process. Are there any questions or comments, or? Hearing none, then all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. It sounded like somebody had a question. Was that Sid?
I was just out there and I just saw something's being constructed already over there. I mean, it looks like there's a bunch of earth movers over there in that particular lot. Are they jumping the gun?
No, I think there's some underground utility work occurring within the right of way adjacent to the site right now.
Okay, I'll vote aye.
Okay, and were there any nays? Hearing none, that motion carries. Item number 12 is R74. This one's coming from the RDA. Alderperson, or President Hirsch, I should say.
Ozzy can take this if you want.
Go ahead, Regina. I can't,
You can't see it.
I can't see it on my.
Okay, resolution authorizing and directing the appropriate city officials to execute a memorandum of understanding between the city of Stoughton and the city of Stoughton's redevelopment authority regarding riverfront related improvements and land division. And I so move.
Second.
Second by Alderperson Riley. President Hirsch, would you like to walk us through this, or?
Sure. This really has to do with language that is needed for another grant that the Director of Park and Rec is applying for with respect to the riverfront part of the redevelopment authority, where the trails, the pedestrian bridge, the shoreline restoration is taking place. Right now, that land is in ownership, but because Park and Rec and we're applying for this grant as part of the city, they just need to see that we have a memorandum of understanding that the RDA is willing to work with the city to get this work done, if I understand it correctly. And so it's just a language to kind of transfer only that 100 feet from the shoreline to the city, so we can actually put in trails, put in that pedestrian bridge over to Mant Park, and do some restoration on the bank aspect of the area. It does not include right now the stormwater improvements that the developer will do. I mean, that's included in that, but the costs won't include that at this point. And maybe if you can explain, if I didn't explain it correctly, then I better explain it.
All right, we have Director Glenn or Director Shield are both here if anybody has any questions for them specific to the need or the document itself. I think Director Glenn worked with our consultant Gary Becker to put this together, and I believe the city attorney might have had some say in it as well, as I recall. Dan or Rodney, would you like to speak to it?
Involved with it, so I don't have any comments really.
Okay.
I think it acknowledges the fact that there's some engineering that's really needing to take place related to the riverbank restoration efforts, the pedestrian bridge crossing, and integrating those plans with the redevelopment process. So it really just authorizes the city to really be a party to that planning process and present materials back to the RDA as part of a anticipated transfer of the land along the river to the city upon completion of that work.
All right, anything you want to add, Dan?
Yeah, I can speak to the grant. So the grant application has 38 ranking questions, and it changes a little from year to year. One of the new questions this year is they wanted a partnership agreement, a public-private partnership agreement, and the MOU like this satisfies that ranking question, so it helps strengthen our application.
All right, any questions or comments? My red light's lit up here. Oh, that was from Dan. Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I do. Does this have anything to do with the Whitewater Park?
I can answer that if Dan doesn't want to. This is part of the restoration on the side of the RDA site. It's not directly related to the Whitewater Park. It's extending a trail system, and hopefully we can extend it from before 8th Street at one point all the way to Water Street, in chunks. Right now, this is only the chunk that's in front of the RDA site. And so that's what this is. It's not necessarily directly related to Whitewater Park. It has more directly related to the redevelopment, riverfront development site, because the green little areas in there are their stormwater management swales that they'll be constructing. As Rodney says, there's engineering going back and forth between Rodney and the developer, and where the trail should be, and where the pedestrian bridge is. So that's really what this chunk that we're voting on tonight.
So Regina, does the bridge go over the any portion of that Whitewater Park area?
No, it comes down from 6th Street. If I remember, it's 6th Street, not 7th Street. 6th Street, right where that little hand is showing you. It's coming down. It's a sight line from basically Rotary Park all the way down, across like on 6th Street to go over to Mant Park. Whitewater Park is more towards 4th Street, so really it is not really part of that. It's really connecting the downtown through the new development to Mant Park.
But the Whitewater Rapids, where does that end?
That's on 4th Street, where the bridge is and where the dam is right now. So that's way to your left on this picture.
Okay. I just want to point out we have not.
Most of this is funded through grant money. If you remember what Dan presented last time, he has been, that and the RDA has really acquired a lot of grant money, so it's a very little cost to the city with all these, to get a beautiful trail, a nice engineered bridge, and it's a win-win for the city.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
I abstain.
Okay, one abstention. That motion carries. Item number 13 is coming from finance. Alderperson Schumacher.
All right, we don't have any resolution on here, but this, I believe, is just an annualized agreement that we have in order to operate the taxi and buses and that sort of thing here within the city. So I don't know if this is this just informational, or is this?
All you need is it'll be the vote.
I'll let
I'm just asking permission to sign it and send it in. We budget this every year. We budget at the max. We use what we use, and then after the audit, we turn the money that we didn't use over. So I just need permission to.
All right, then I will move an approval for permission that the Director of Finance approves this agreement.
Second.
Second by Alderperson Jensen. Any discussion on this?
I do, Tim, again.
Sure.
Okay, so do we have an annual review on this transit system that we have in town, or is that just going to go on in for an item? Because I think we should probably be reviewing this to get the best bang for our buck. I'm not sure that that we shouldn't be looking at potentially other sources for transportation system for the city. We really don't have a bus service. We don't have much of a service to go out anywhere out of the area. I'm just not completely pleased with the transportation system that we have in place. And it seems like one of those things that just keeps going on and on and on. The difference on the budget from what had been the previous transit system, which was more local. I believe that this is Viroqua or Vernon or something, Vernon County maybe. we used to have a local system that was much more efficient, or I mean, much less costly, I believe. I don't have the figures in front of me, but I think we should be looking at, doing a idea about whether this is the best system that we have in place. We've got a fairly substantial amount of money that is for people who ride this system, and I'm just not sure that we're getting the best bang for the buck. That $371,000, that's a lot of money. And it's I know that goes to salaries and all that, but that seems like a fairly pretty expensive project that we have, that we should be at least looking at that in our CIP maybe, or whatever, in our budgetary process for each year, and not just make this a standard stamp of approval every time it comes up.
Well, let me try to answer your question a little bit, Sid. So we bid this out through a state contract every 5 years. And that goes to the finance committee, and there's a criteria that the finance committee has to follow in order to rank the bids that we receive. Once the finance committee ranks their bids, they send them to the state. The state has criteria that they use, mostly related to the financial operations. And you can see that when you look at the budget here, the majority of the expenses are paid from the state. Usually varies between 55%, give or take a few. And then the shortfalls that are created for the expenses, the city picks up, but we offset them through the fares that the riders pay when they're using the service. And we can get you more information, but I can tell you that we've been expanding the number of rides. We've added more vehicles with lifts on them with council approval during the CIP process, which I think has really increased ridership. But I do agree with you that this really only helps a certain amount of people, and we'd like to be able to expand services, especially to get outside of Stoughton. And we had numerous discussions with the county that we plan on continuing into their next budget cycle, to try to at least get a study down here and get a needs analysis. I'm not sure where that's going to go, because with the virus going on, one of the things we're already hearing is that sales tax revenues that are collected either through the state and or county are anticipated to be lower, and that's where the money comes from to fund these types of programs. So we're really concerned about our ability to be able to expand them. But I certainly understand your concern. We'd love to be able to help more people with their transportation and keep cars off the road in the process. So, I agree with what you're saying. Brett, did you have a comment?
Did I, Jim?
No, I think Alderperson Schumacher, did you have a comment?
I didn't have anything else to add into it.
And certainly, Jamin, if you have anything you want to add, because you deal with them with the cab company, more than I do. Certainly, you're welcome to make comments as well.
Yeah, no, you hit it on the head in terms of how the process works in the selection. The out-of-pocket cost of the city is actually pretty minimal. Most of it's actually offset by the fare revenue and then the grant itself. So it doesn't have a major impact at all on the city budget.
I just want to say that it has an effect on my budget, because it all comes out of taxes, and I think we just have to be careful with how we spend our money. If it's a grant, where that grant comes from is from our taxpayers' dollars that's just not a free gift to us. And I think my concern is just that we have been talking for years and years, and I know the county has to be part of this. we've been talking about a bus system that we could get people to back and forth to Madison or other, Janesville or whatever other places. That if we just continue to spend our money in one source like a taxi service that absolutely will not go out of town. They will not cross the line. And at least that's what I'm hearing from a number of people. And that has become somewhat of a resentment with some people who just feel like they are being left out of the whole process. There are places that are our businesses that we consider to be our businesses that a cab company will not go to if they're cross line. So I just think that we got to be careful about how we spend our money.
Okay, well, I would at least suggest passing this grant because we're already entered into the contract with running. So if we don't get the grant, we'd be paying for it out of pocket. And we
All right,
I'm not talking about not taking a grant that's offered to us from the state, but it's just none of this stuff is free money.
Right. I have a question from Alderperson Hiley and then Alderperson Lagaki.
I just want to comment that the service this provides is very important to certain people. It might not be to everyone, but there are people, for instance, who are wheelchair bound and can't afford their own lift van or whatever accommodations they need to get places. They don't have any other options than this, and that's extremely important to certain people who rely on this. And I consider it really an essential service, whether, and it's allowing people to get to jobs as well. It's not saying it's not just a drain on everyone's pocketbook, as it has been implied.
Okay. Alderperson Lagaki.
I do appreciate Alderperson Boersma's comments, and he's been consistently stating those. And I'm wondering, in our organization of council and our different committees, is this under a purview of one of our committees that it's frequently just coming up here at council and not being explored in a smaller group?
This went to finance before it came to council.
And I believe the budget process goes through a number of different meetings and workshops as well.
So I might encourage us to look at it as a social issue at multiple levels. There's quite a intersections here, and maybe we could think logically. Not tonight. I want to stay focused on, but perhaps this is something that should be given to the charge of a committee. And though with COVID, I also want to state that I appreciate that we will have this fan service, that it will be available. It may not leave, but that we're and trying to do this because I think it also is essential right now. But I think we do have to look at this, but perhaps just not at council commentary.
Why don't we have a group that would, or a committee that would handle it? Would it be finance or public safety? Where would it best fit?
Jamin, what year are we in with this 5-year agreement?
This is year number 3. I believe we entered into it in 18.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So I mean, this does come through finance, and we do discuss this one. We do discuss the mileage, the hours, the merits of the program, all that sort of thing. So I mean, I do think that this one sits well within that one, because I think that we're fairly socially cognizant about and not just looking at the finance numbers of things within that committee structure. So I think this one would be as well within that, and maybe perhaps in year 4 or 5 of the agreement, that then we look at it a little bit more, take a more fine-tooth comb approach to it, to see that we are maximizing our dollar value out of it. So I'd suggest keeping it into finance.
One more comment, Tim.
Sure.
Okay, so ultimately what we're doing is, and I understand Ben's situation too, and I fully agree. I mean, we need to be supporting the people who use it and who need it. But the concern that I have is that we have the one taxi service. We put all our eggs in one basket. We are not talking about any other kind of transportation other than the taxi service, with a fairly hefty amount that we spend, and it limits our ability to expand our services to another one, maybe a bus, maybe something that's going to be even better, maybe something that would go out of the city a bit. A taxi ride from Madison to Stoughton, or Stoughton to Madison is, and not just a $20, 30, 40, it's more like $50, $60, $70 to get somebody from Stoughton to Madison who needs maybe medical care or whatever. We're putting all our eggs in one basket, and I think we got to be careful about that, because we're spending a slew of money on one particular service that will not get out of town.
Well, I think the argument is we're actually spending very little amount of money for the amount of service that we're able to provide inside of town. And I think what you're talking about is a separate issue. I think, if you take Sun Prairie, for example, they were able to put together a bus system. In addition, they have the same company we do for their local cab rides, but they're able to provide a bus service as well. One thing they have going for them that we don't have, well, two things. One, they have more density, and the other one is they're close to the east side of Madison, so they can do it pretty efficiently as compared to us. But we haven't given up the discussion with the county to do that. It's just that, with the circumstances that we're under right now, a lot of these types of discussions admittedly have slowed down, but they haven't stopped. So I expect you'll be hearing more about this, especially as we get closer to budget time. But there again, I'm concerned that the funding from the county, and even on this program from the state, we might not get the same amount of funding that we get from the state for this program. And I don't know if we'll be able to get any additional funding from the county because the revenues are going to be down. So, that's where the importance of trying to get the economy going again, as soon as the safer at home order is lifted, is really going to be important for communities. So economic development is going to be something that, we're going to be talking a lot about as we transition, out of this period. President Hirsch, did you have a comment?
No, well, to expand on what you were saying, what I just was thinking is that maybe at some point we can have the county board, and I know Phil has been serving on that board, to give us an update of where they are on mass transit from Stoughton to the surrounding areas and what the latest discussion is. I know it may have all kind of changed with respect to what's going on right now, but it would be nice to be updated as a council of where the county is going and what they're thinking of for mass transit from the surrounding municipalities like Stoughton, Oregon, McFarland, etc., up to Madison.
Yep.
Okay.
If I may.
I agree.
If I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, please do. Yes.
As you touched on there, we were working on discussion, as I am our representative on the Citizen Advisory Board of the Madison Area, or the Citizen Advisory Committee of the Madison Area Transportation Planning Board. We were working on some discussion about just what Sid brought up about trying to figure out how to get us on the, regional transportation map, basically. But with the COVID thing, that's all kind of, come to a standstill for the moment. Hopefully that will get cranked up again. But I can talk to Sid individually about that, about what we'd like to try to do. But yeah, I think we all agree that right now we're kind of out here somewhat disconnected if you do not own a private car or if you don't have the means to pay for a taxi from Madison or one of the other sort of ride sharing type operations. So yeah, it's something we want to fix.
All right, I have Alderperson Lagaki, and then I'd like to get to a vote here.
I agree. I would like to talk about this, as I said, in a more intentional manner. I totally agree. This does belong in finance, but I do see some social issues that are a little wider and connected, and perhaps some of that regional and or county involvement. Perhaps, even though we're all busy enough, I looked at the definition of community affairs. This could be seen as a short-term project related to a social. If we could assist in helping move this along so that we're really having very intentional conversations about it, I would support that.
All right, thank you. All right, I think we're ready to vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Yeah, no.
One no. Okay, that motion does carry. Item number 14 we covered. Item number 15 is coming from the Finance Committee, Alderperson Schumacher.
All right. R76-2020, authorizing and directing the proper city officials to enter into an agreement with Speedway Sand and Gravel, Inc. for the 2020 Public Works Construction Project Contract 2-2020. So move.
Second.
Second. Take your pick.
Yeah, I'll let Holly choose. All right. Anything you want to cover on this, or do you want to hand this one over?
Just basically that this is for some of the areas that are on Main Street and some of the side streets off of there, and will be coordinated when the Main Street construction is taking place, so that the detour, so that the disruption will be minimized.
Okay. Anything you'd like to add, Director Shield?
I can just highlight this project really consists of pavement rehab, both in the street and on sidewalks from Page Street to Fifth Street, along with total reconstruction of Forest Street from Main Street to Washington, along with the city parking lot adjacent to City Hall and some adjacent work within the alley next to City Hall as well. This project, the engineer's estimate was approximately $100,000 more than what the low bid was on this. So we're seeing this as an attractive project to proceed with. And it, as mentioned, it is coinciding with the DOT closure of Highway 51 or Main Street from Page Street to Whole Avenue. So we're trying to capitalize on the reduced traffic volume downtown and coinciding with that project timing as well.
All right, and how are we paying for all this?
Nice softball. It is part of the TIF district, TIF District 4. This is the last year for this type of construction expenditure, and we're utilizing that funding to pay for this work. The Utilities Committee met last night, and if Jill's available or wanted to speak to it, but they're also supportive of this project moving forward with the small amount of sanitary work that's being done as part of this project as well.
Thank you. And it was approved unanimously last night at Utilities Committee, as Rodney said. We do potentially have a small budget amount of $25,000 allocated to this project, but we don't anticipate needing that at this point.
Any idea when this will start?
The contractor is anxious to get rolling, so upon award, we'll process the contracts, and hopefully they'll get started early part of June. Again, the DOT project will start closing down segments of Main Street west of Page Street sometime in the first part of June.
So what you're saying is we should probably approve this tonight so they can get started.
We're hopeful. There is an opportunity possibly for them to start doing work on, say, Forest Street if their schedule allows to move that before the DOT work starts as well.
Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments?
If I might, Mayor, this is
Sure, go
Riley.
ahead. Yep.
Thank you. This is actually only tangentially related. I'm curious, given the potential economic catastrophes that we might be looking at in the not too distant future, how many of our other projects right now have gone completely to contract? In other words, they have been bid and the contracts have been accepted with respect to a number of the other improvements we're looking at with streets, et cetera, if I might inquire as to that.
Contract 1 was awarded. That's the one Prospect, Grant, Taft, or McKinley and Sherman area. That's been awarded. This would be contract 2. The scope of this one would be downtown. The DOT project is being led by the DOT, and that's from Page to Whole. It's my understanding the state has awarded potentially a project already. Our contract number 3 for the Roby Road area, bids were received yesterday, and we're reviewing those and would be bringing them back to finance on May 12th.
Good enough. So we have contracts for the contract 1, correct, Roddy? Those are signed, sealed, and delivered?
It's been awarded. They have not been fully signed yet, but it was awarded at previous council meeting, yes.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, if it's been awarded but we've not signed it yet, and we have concerns about the economic impacts, would the council have an opportunity to address those if that were the case?
That might be a legal question about the award and the processing of that. Certainly the special assessment aspect of that project will be coming to a public hearing on May 26th.
Okay. Mayor, would it be all right if I asked council that question, if he is able to answer it?
Sure.
I'm just curious. Thank you. Matt, do you have thoughts? I'm just curious as to the status with respect to a binding contract on some of these projects that we have committed ourselves to, but of course we committed ourselves to them before the madness ensued, and I have concerns about the availability of funds once we finish the contract. Are we committed on whatever phase 1 is? Are we done deal? We could not possibly look at that if we're concerned, if Jamin is concerned and the council is concerned with respect to funding on those.
Well, I would say this, that on all of these contracts, there's a requirement before.
I lost you. Sorry.
Or as contract is signed, execution of the contract, there's a requirement that we determine that provision for the work. So, and that provision has been made. I'm assuming that contract we're entering into, the funding is available for that contract.
So that is still, in short, and I'm sorry, I lost part of what you said, Matt, but that is still a contingency then, that we could still address the issue as to whether or not we actually have funding available for it, et cetera. And then obviously there's a special assessment angle as well, correct?
I'm not sure I'm following your question.
Okay. Well, just let me just make it as basic as I possibly can. Are we committed at this point unequivocally to go through with these contracts, or is there an opportunity to see what level of devastation has been wrought and whether or not it's wise to be spending that money at this time, given the circumstances? Do we have any opportunity to look at that, or are we in a enforceable contract that we just move on? That's it.
Once we execute the contract, I believe once we execute the contract, we're bound by the contract.
Okay, and have we executed the contracts?
I believe that purpose of the resolution tonight is to actually authorize that, but it has not yet. Is that correct, Rodney?
Sure.
Matt, you're breaking up, but contract one has not been signed yet. That one was awarded by the council, I believe, last meeting. And those contracts are in process to be signed by the contractor and the city at this point.
Okay, so if contract one has not yet been signed, is there any opportunity at all for Jamin, and I realize he'd probably be engaging in monumental speculation, but is there any opportunity at all in looking at this, taking a bit of a breath and seeing whether or not we're gonna have the money to do this stuff? I realize we're planning on borrowing and getting special assessments, but you know, are we gonna be able to pay back what we borrow? I think it's a legitimate question. I have no problem, you know, approving this because it sounds as though there's TIF money for this. If I'm understanding what Rodney is saying, I don't think it would be the most foolish notion to pause and look and see if we have any concerns as to whether or not we're going to have the money to afford this contract that's not yet been signed. I don't know how if we can do that or not, but I think it wouldn't be the worst idea one has ever had. That's for sure.
I have a comment, respectfully, Alder Riley, I really appreciate you bringing that up, but right now I think point of order, we kind of have to look at this resolution and hopefully maybe we can get that on the next agenda.
Sure.
I just don't know how to handle what you're saying when it's not on the agenda because we can't take any action of it tonight.
Thank you, Regina. Point very.
Come up with a way to deal with that. I don't know how we can actually have a discussion and do any action item when it's not on the agenda.
Councilperson Hirsch, I agree with you. I appreciate that. I guess, let me just ask this if I may. When would we have an opportunity to try and address it and put it on the agenda before the contract's actually signed? If there is such an opportunity.
I don't know the process. Rodney would have to tell me the process, how close we are, and I guess we'll,
Right now, we're acting under the previous. Right now, we're acting under the direction of the council. The contract's been awarded. We're moving through the process. One of the counter signatures on the contract is Jamin as the comptroller to confirm there's adequate funds available to fund the project. So I don't know if Jamin can speak to that, but that's certainly the direction we're operating under right now for contract one.
Thank you. And if I might, just one more quick question. I understand I'm out of order, so I appreciate your patience. What is the time frame on that, please? Either Jamin or Rodney, if you wouldn't mind.
We're looking to sign contracts post haste. Actually, they're looking to get started on the week of May 11th.
Okay. All right. Well, if Jamin's going to certify we have the money, I don't, then that's his job, I guess. So that's all I wanted to bring to everyone's attention for thinking about it. All right. Councilperson Hirsch. Yep. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Certainly, just to add one thing, Alderperson Riley, we're sensitive, especially on the special assessments. On this particular project, I think many of them were waived. Is that correct, Rodney?
So council took specific action to waive any rehab work on Main Street frontage because that was part of a project in the early 2000s. And so there are no special assessments for the Main Street frontage. The Forest Street project is subject to special assessments, much like when the south side of Forest Street was done a few years ago between Main Street and Jefferson Street.
And just to add one other thing, Jamin's team is working on looking at special assessments to see if there's opportunity for deferred payments, but they just haven't fully completed their work yet. So we have been working on that particular issue, and I expect that that'll be at a future finance committee meeting. And we're also discussing what our approach is going to be for next year's CIP, and you'll hear more about that in the next couple months. But I think it's going to be I'll just describe it as I don't think it'll be as aggressive as it is right now. We certainly had a lot of projects the last couple of years, and I think all of them were fully justified that they really just needed to get done. But I think we may, take a step back and do some additional planning. And I know there's already a lot of collaboration going on between planning department, Stoughton Utilities, and Public Works Department, as well as finance on the CIP. These guys have been working on this stuff already, probably for at least a month that I know of, maybe even beforehand. So I think you're going to see, more discussion, and we are very sensitive to the economic hardships that people are gonna have because of the virus.
May I ask one quick question, Mayor?
Sure.
If that's for me, thank you. This is Riley again. Are those considerations, Mayor, being applied to the contract that's already been in essence awarded but not yet signed? Or are those to occur with projects going forward, including this one that we're discussing tonight?
I'm not sure I'm at a point where I can commit to that. I would let Jamin speak to that, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out. If we can apply them to this year, I would certainly love to be able to do that.
Thank you. Okay. But perhaps that would be dealt with in this public hearing that Rodney mentioned.
Yeah.
I do have a question too.
Sure, go ahead, Sid.
Okay, so I'm just looking at what my wife had said in the public, her discourse, and I think she's right. I mean, I think we've got to be really careful right now, especially not just for the city, but also for the people who are spending money. So this is not tongue in cheek, but for instance, is a grant project, is there a signed contract on that particular street for the sidewalk?
That was the one that Rodney had just spoken to. So I think the short answer is no, but it's in the works.
Okay, because I think that particular project, maybe some others, could be curtailed for a while. I just don't see that there's a terrible need for that for right now. I just don't see it. Why are we spending money where we don't have to? And why are we forcing people to spend their money on a project that has been controversial? But we should look at saving some money.
As mentioned earlier, this isn't really on the agenda. So if you want to speak offline on that, we can get together tomorrow. We can talk a little bit more about it. So anything else on this resolution? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I abstain.
One abstention. Okay, thank you. All right, I think we're at old business. We have 3 items related to Kettle Park West Phase 2, and I believe we're gonna start with R69. And I'll try to pull it up here. And who wants to take the first whack at this, Attorney Dregney or Planning Director Shield?
Let me, don't we want the master development agreement first?
Yeah.
Oh, either way. So you want 68, sorry. I'll go ahead and get started. I'm still looking for it here. There it is.
All right. So there are 2 outstanding issues relating to the master development agreement that I'll try and summarize for you tonight. The first issue has to do with the park dedication issue. And as you may recall, the developer proposed dedicating about 4 acres of land located outside the boundaries of the plat in the town of Rutland, and adding that to the parkland that is dedicated within the plat boundaries. And I was looking for some direction or some legal analysis from the developers team about how to make that work. I did receive a response from the developer since our last meeting, had a chance to look at that. And I proposed a bit of an adjustment to what they're proposing. The agreement in front of you tonight actually requires the developer to pay fees in lieu of parkland dedication, because we did not have this conveyance issue worked out in a way that I thought was approvable yet. The developer's proposal is that the Maybes convey about 4 acres of land to the city, and that the city would then subsequently annex that land. My suggestion is that they modify the procedure somewhat, and that the agreement require that the Maybes annex that 4 acres of land to the city and then convey the land to the city, and that be the process that we follow for reasons that I won't get into unless you want to get into the weeds on it. I'm also suggesting that the agreement include language indicating that if there's a challenge to this procedure by, for example, the town of Rutland, that the developer would be responsible for covering the costs associated with defending that legal challenge. And if for some reason this procedure is found inappropriate, that the developer would then be obligated to pay the fees in lieu of land dedication to the city. We don't have all of that language drafted in a way that is approvable tonight. I think there may still be developer representatives listening in on the call. Yes, I can see their names are still here. So I'm not sure if they'll want to speak to this or if you're going to want to talk to them about this. But I guess where I am on this issue is that if the council is satisfied with what I'm suggesting, I could amend the language in the agreement to provide for that approach and have it ready for you to take a look at the next meeting. I'm going to stop and ask if there are any questions about that.
Matt, this is Regina. I think I like your approach, and I look forward to reading it for next time.
I would agree.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on that one before I move on? Okay. So the next item has to do with the wetland area. At our last meeting, there was some discussion of adding language to the agreement that requires that the wetland area, particularly where the kettle is, be addressed in some way. And I think the concern is evaluating the condition of that wetland area to determine whether there are invasive species or concerns of that nature that need to be addressed. And if there are, getting them corrected, and then making sure that that area is maintained properly until such time as it is dedicated to the city. Alderperson Hirsch agreed to do some research to determine what might be appropriate in that regard, and I'll let her speak to kind of what she's found out about that. I also participated yesterday morning in a telephone call with the developers team to discuss this issue, to hear their perspective on it. I'm not sure exactly what the best way is to proceed with this. I think maybe I'll just try and summarize where I think we are as best I can. So I think the developers team perspective on this is that they're willing to cooperate with the city to address the wetland area, but They're concerned about committing additional resources to that, and they're also concerned about delays, having a process at this point on the wetland issue delay their ability to start construction, and they're concerned about losing a construction season. From a financial standpoint, as you know, they did request TIF funding. The TIF analysis has been done, and the TIF funding has indicated that financing for this project is such that TIF is necessary. And so I guess their perspective is, if they're being asked to spend more money on the wetland issue, they're being asked to do something that they don't feel they have the resources to do. So that's what we heard from the developers team. Alderperson Hirsch has been working through contacts she has at the DNR to try and determine what an appropriate procedure would be to evaluate the conditions at the wetland area, to develop an appropriate plan for any necessary restoration work and maintenance work. And I'll let her speak to that. Regina, do you want to summarize where you are on that?
Sure. There's a couple of different avenues I've been taking. One, I've contacted, I've been working with the DNR, Fish and Wildlife, Wisconsin Wetlands, and Ducks Unlimited and NRCS on this. And right now, there's a couple of things that I'm looking at, and like I said, I didn't have enough time to get it all together. But one, I have wetlands expert has agreed. He works with a private consulting firm to go look at the site to kind of give us a ballpark estimate of what his company would charge to do a full assessment, what kind of restoration would be done, how long it would take, and then kind of an estimate of the overall cost over the 3 to 5 year period. And I think that would work into what we had just discussed with the TID monies, like the $100,000. The second is that I've also charged them with finding out if there's another way of financing this. There are some wetland easement programs through NRCS and Fish and Wildlife and other private and public entities to see how other municipalities have handled that. I have a conference call with one of, I think it's Wisconsin Wetlands Association tomorrow morning, that have been working with municipalities on these issues, and they just did one similar to this in Ozaukee County. So I'm looking to see how our two situations are similar. Yes, I don't anticipate this to be like a time delay. It's more of a responsibility. Before, the developer hands over this area to the city, I don't want it, meaning, me and a number of people in this community don't want to see that we're getting a mess, that the city is then going to have to incur a lot of costs to make sure this wetland is functioning, that it's not stuck full with invasive species, that it still has ecological integrity to function as a wetland and actually serve as a stopover point for both migratory waterfowl and shorebirds, etc. So I'm working on it. 1 week's time isn't enough to pull this all together now that we have the CARP-C language. I wish we had that earlier. And so I think we have a lot of people in the state that have expertise that I've been reaching out to I can put together some options for our next meeting in a couple of weeks. And I would entertain any questions or any other ideas.
That's a lot to do, Regina, and thank you.
All right, so hearing no questions, is there anything else you want to continue with, Matt, or is that pretty much where we're at?
Well, it sounds like, there's a couple ways we could go here. One way would be to allow, Alderperson Hirsch to continue the work that she's doing, to develop more information about what kind of restoration work and maintenance would be appropriate at this location, and then, bring that back and discuss how to use that information going forward. It seems to me that at some point the choice that's going to have to be addressed by the council will be, on the one possibility will be to say, okay, we're going to try and work with the developer to build language into the agreement to require the developer to undertake that restoration and maintenance work, and have them be responsible for it. And then there's the question of how to pay for it, whether that would be a developer cost or a developer cost that could be TIF funded or a TIF cost, or whether the city would say, rather than have the developer be responsible for this work, we'll take it out as a city, and then fund it with TIF funding. So I think those are the decisions that lie ahead. Is this going to be something that the developer is going to be asked to undertake, and how are we going to pay for it? Or is the city going to say, we'd rather have control of it ourselves and do it ourselves, and we would pay for it with TIF funding? I don't know if you're in a position tonight where you want to talk about that or not, or if you want to wait. Yep.
Matt, I would suggest that we wait. Like I said, I have a conference call tomorrow, and we have another person giving us information later this week. I really would hate to have the council make a decision on nothing at this point when we do have information that they will actually have some information to make a really good decision on. You're just throwing things out there that are possibilities when in fact we might actually have some concrete information in a matter of days.
And I certainly understand that, and I don't have a problem with that. One of the things we're trying to do is balance our needs as far as getting these issues resolved, and also to keep the project going. So the question will be is, can we get the answers we need within the next 2 weeks? It sounds like maybe we can. And if we were to get them, before then, are we in a position to have a conversation, before May 12th or on May 12th to get these 2 issues resolved? So I think that's what our goal is right now. If we extend out any further than that, it really puts the start date into question here. And I think it would be in the best interest of both parties to try to keep this thing moving. I've been talking a lot about the economy right now. Certainly, getting some construction over there will help all of our businesses. And whether it's the retail or even some downtown businesses, and if we can get the hotels filled up, I think that'll be a good thing for our local economy. So I want us to be sensitive of that, but I don't want to rush the council into making the decision if they don't feel they don't have all the information.
I would move to postpone this agenda item until May 12th at the next meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. All right, next item is R69, which is the subdivision improvement. Are we prepared to talk about that one next?
I recommend that that be tabled as well, given that we don't have the master development agreement approved yet, that should be tabled at this point.
All right. Did somebody make the motion?
So moved, Greg.
All right, is there a second?
Second. Highly.
Second by Hiley. Okay, any discussion on that one? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that'll be back on May 12th, and that just leaves us with R71, which is the TIF agreement. Any thoughts on that one, Attorney Dragney?
Yeah, I just would update you on a couple of developments there, and then recommend that it also be tabled so that it's acted on after the other agreements. But just to report, since the last meeting, I did provide a revised draft of the agreement where instead of Junction 138 LLC south of 138 to the city, the agreement now provides for an annexation of that property. That language has been reviewed by the developers team. The message I think that I've received is that I have not yet received final confirmation that that the owners of that land are in agreement with that, but it looks like that may work. I was also asked to verify the purchase price of the land. Junction 138 LLC paid $600,000 for that land, plus incurred additional costs for the seller's legal and moving expenses of $36,000. So the $636,000 that they represented to the city is an accurate number. And then I was asked to determine or verify who the owners are of that LLC. And the information I've received is that Dave Jenkins and two other individuals own that LLC. The two individuals other than Mr. Jenkins wish to remain anonymous, but they have represented to me that Dave Jenkins is the only owner of that LLC who also has an interest in the Kettle Park West development. So that's just information to update you on what you asked me to find out. And I would suggest that this agreement, the TIF agreement, also be tabled until your May 12 meeting.
I move the table.
Second.
Okay. Holly, did you catch a second?
I have a motion by Boersma. I didn't get the second.
I seconded. Maybe somebody else did as well, but this is Reeves.
Okay, Alderperson Reeves. I do have.
Before you do that, there's somebody else on the chat that needed a comment, the hen shoes.
Yeah.
Did they comment?
Yep, Ron wants to comment. Thanks, Regina. I saw that as well. Ron, are you with us? Are you muted?
All right, apologize for that. Thank you.
It's all right.
I keep my camera down so you don't have to look at me the entire time. So I guess before a vote is taken on tabling it, the TIF agreement, at least as I've listened in on the master development and the other agreement and the reasons for tabling that, those are not issues that are addressed or relevant to this TIF agreement. And we've made the, as we've talked through, and approval was forwarded on by the Finance Committee. I would like this to be acted on. The next steps we're trying to, and our goal was to get everything done by April 28th. We have financing that we have to incur yet. It takes time for things, once they're approved, to make it through the lenders and then the lenders to approve them. So if this gets delayed, this TIF piece of it, which is a financing piece, gets delayed, then that will further delay the project from starting. I can work with the master development agreement and the phase agreement being delayed because that doesn't have financial ramifications, but we're working to get this approved so that it can get into the hands of our lender and they can verify terms and conditions and we can move that forward. So I guess I would just ask the council's consideration of that, and it's not tied to the same issues that were causing the development agreements to be tabled. So that's, I guess, what.
This is Matt. I'd just say a couple things. One, the TIF agreement is drafted in a way that suggests or indicates expressly that the master development agreement has already been approved, and it has not been approved yet. And furthermore, there's a possibility that the discussion that we're having about the master development agreement and the wetland area and TIF funding may have an influence on the TIF agreement. So I understand your desire to keep that moving, but I think the proper sequence here is the master agreement and then the TIF agreement.
Any council members have any thoughts on that, or? All right. Anything else you want to add, Ron? As long as you're still.
I understand that the execution of the TIF agreement, though. I guess it would be good for us to know if there's any issues in the TIF agreement that are embedded in it right now versus, I don't know what future issue may arise, I guess, as a result of the wetlands issue, but are there any other issues within the TIF agreement that we should know about that need to be discussed, I guess, so we can get feedback on them?
Well, Ron, not that I'm aware of, I did send a revised draft out that after the last council meeting where we did two things. One, we changed the allocation priority of how increment is being allocated. We were somewhat responsive to your request, but not 100% responsive to your request. I've not heard back from your team that you have any objection to how we're doing it, but that's where we are on that issue. And then on the question of the Junction 138 parcel, I heard feedback from your team that was likely to be an acceptable resolution, using the annexation approach. I don't think I heard definitive feedback on that's been approved by your team, but I'm not aware of any other issue with the TIF agreement, at least from the city's perspective.
And I can say I thought that was what we were going to address at the meeting this evening. We are in agreement with how those two items were, modified and revised in this agreement. So we don't have any issues with the agreement as drafted.
This is Riley, if I might just kind of jump in, Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. And if I might address something to Council. Council, what is the potential holdup, or what is the potential impact upon the TIF with respect to this wetlands issue that we're now endeavoring to address and that Councilperson Hirsch needs some time to work on? What are the potential impacts or consequences? Is there something that is profound enough that it might cause us to say, nope, we're no longer going to do this TIF, we're no longer going to do the improvements, as I don't remember if those are articulated in this. Is this just the 3 million tonight, or is this the 3 million plus the 3.8 in improvements, I guess? Let me ask that first.
Well, the TIF agreement basically provides $3 million in TIF funding to the developer.
Right. Okay.
And
yep.
But so I think I'd say a couple things. One,
Yeah.
I'm not sure how the wetland discussion might affect the TIF agreement. It's possible, for example, that the developer will be asked to undertake wetland restoration and maintenance work that will have a price tag attached to it, and that they will ask for additional TIF funding. That's a possibility.
Gotcha. Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, and that's what I was trying to get at, because if there's nothing substantive that we have to be concerned about, I would be inclined to say, let's just approve the darn TIF money. If there is something that is going to be an issue for the developer here, as we're moving forward, I guess, I would have to agree that perhaps we need to hold off on that, but I am sympathetic to allowing them to move forward at this point, because it's been, of course, as we all know, quite a bit of time. Anyway, that's the nature of my question. Thank you. You've answered it.
Thank you for the question. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Anything else anybody's concerned about in the agreement?
Excuse me, Tim? Could I
Yes,
add something? It struck me last week that the wetlands issue is certainly important to the attractiveness and functional nature of the whole community over there, but it came up kind of late, it seems. And I don't think it's particularly large amount of money, and I don't think it's an item that couldn't be ironed out. So I guess I'm kind of on the side of the issue that would say there's really nothing profound or major that would look like it would disrupt or totally change things from moving forward with the master agreement or the TIF agreement. And I think I can understand the urgency and need for trying to stay on schedule for the use of the TIF money. That'd be my thoughts on it.
Okay.
Well, Tim?
Yes, go ahead, Sid.
I would ask the developer whether or not he thinks this is a hurdle. Because if he's willing to say, we think that this is going to be resolved and not be a sticking point of this. I was the one who has made the resolution, made the thing to table. So, but I would be interested in knowing whether or not, he can't talk I understand he can't talk for the whole group, but from our perspective, it's kind of a deal breaker for some of us anyway. And whether or not he has anything to say about that, I'd be interested.
Let me comment. I'll comment briefly, and then Dennis has more knowledge on this than I do. As you all know, I've presented in front of you before. Finance is the main area I get involved in, but I'm familiar with entitlements in general. But we're following the requirements that the DNR provided to us. If you go back and it was on the screen a little earlier, there isn't anything that we as a developer are doing incorrectly or not taking care of. We wanted to do some restoration in order to make it more of an amenity than what it currently is, but the DNR would not allow us to do that. They feel that if we manage the water levels appropriately in accordance with what was provided to us, and it shows on the screen here, it's called the bounds, and make sure it stays within that level, that it's ultimately going to recover itself, but it will take many years to do that. Now, that being said, does it ever hurt to have someone come out, take a look, and make sure that invasive species haven't come in there and the like? No, we're not opposed to any of that. But, you have a master development agreement in place that we've negotiated in, excess of probably a year. We're just doing one phase. There's multiple phases coming beyond it. Until we get to the future phase, which raises, I think it's, where the condos are, the kettle is used in that what's referred to as the amounts is a larger area right now than it will be once the full development is done. And as we approach future phases and start to do the fills on the, what would be the southwest side of the development, that then becomes more defined, and it will then be the most appropriate time to do any finalizing of the kettle. So we do have future phases coming, and I'm not saying this isn't a relevant issue, but it's going to be a relevant issue for a number of years to come and can be worked on. So I don't know, Dennis, if you want to comment more specifically on that than what I was able to explain.
Well, I mean, we certainly, you know, can work with the community, and we've said, you know, we would look to do that. You know, waiting the 2 weeks really impacts our ability to start the financing procedure, to finalize the financing procedure. We're certainly willing to work with the community and looking at the plan and seeing how long it takes. And, you know, if it's not overly expensive and it appears that we can incorporate that into some TIF dollars, and it's not a burden on the project, I certainly think we can get it done. And, you know, we've been in the community for a long time. We've got a huge investment to get this residential side of the thing done. And I'd like to see us continue to move forward. You know, we're right at the edge of losing construction time again this year. And, you know, if it becomes a major development problem, then we'll have to sit and talk about it. But right now, it appears it's not going to be that way. And I'd just like to see this thing keep moving along.
Mayor Swadley, I'd like to say one thing, and that is I'm concerned that after a period of time, and we're all done with it, the project or whatever, that we end up with a mess in that wetland. And that would be a major concern for the city, because we can't anticipate spending a whole lot of money on a wetland that looks terrible or is not environmentally sound. That's just a major issue for me. And I'm addressing this to Tim. So.
Yeah, and I think that's the point that, you know, President Hirsch has been making as well. So I think that's why, you know, we're discussing it tonight. So unless anybody has any other thoughts, Holly, we have a motion on the table.
Mayor, may I briefly address that last issue?
Okay. Sure.
Good evening. This is Dan O'Callahan appearing on behalf of the development team. You know, that's a good point that Alder Boersma just raised regarding the turnover of that wetland to the city. It's an issue that we raised as the development team at our very first meeting with city staff back in January when we started negotiating the development agreement and the TIF agreement 5 months ago. And on our list of issues to talk through in that very first meeting was the process for turning that over. And the response we got from city staff at that time was it's too early to talk about the city taking responsibility for that wetland area. That would have to come later. And so if you look at page 8 of the development agreement, this issue is actually addressed there. And it makes it clear that this outlot 1, this the kettle area, the wetland, is not within the scope of the improvements that are discussed in this development agreement, and that dedication of that area is not happening as part of this and will not happen until responsibility for stormwater management infrastructure located on such lands has been constructed and accepted by the city. So that's an issue that we wanted to work through, but city staff preferred that we wait on that. And the language in the development agreement does address that. So with that being the case, we really would like to see some action on the agreement. There's still room, plenty of opportunity for the developer to work with the city. I think the the inquiry that Alder Hirsch, Council President Hirsch made last week about the condition of the wetlands is an important issue that deserves to be looked at. But we're 5 months into the negotiation of this agreement, and we were anticipating a final approval tonight based on what's been on the effort to date. It doesn't foreclose the possibility of additional discussions, additional agreements. It seems like we're just starting to look at that issue now, and it may take some time before we know what we're even talking about. So I think the language that's in here in this paragraph A, it does protect the city, does address Elder Boersma's concern that the city not be stuck accepting something that it's uncomfortable accepting. The language here is clear. The city retains full control.
Mayor, if I may, briefly, this is Riley again.
Sure.
Thank you. What I'm curious about, again, just as with last week, what leverage, if any, are we losing by just passing this TIF tonight? I mean, it seems as though the developer is advising or indicating, or it's their opinion, that we can still address this issue, that we're not giving this issue away. I know that council is talking about the fact that, well, if we have specific plans that we develop, that may cause us to make an additional ask of the developer in some fashion or another. But does that preclude our saying we are committed to what we have been discussing ad infinitum here with regard to this TIF money? Unless this is Seward's folly, I'm inclined to say, why, no, I would not oppose approving this TIF money tonight. So if there's some profound or substantive issue that we are giving up leverage on, or that we may never recover from, then that's one thing. If there's not, and this can still be addressed effectively, and city staff is satisfied it can be, I'd be inclined to favor that we move forward with the TIF. So that's where I am.
Well, Mr. Mayor, we haven't gotten anything really from the developer for an assurance, but I withdraw my motion, and if somebody else wants to make that motion for a table, they can do it, but I'm going to withdraw it right now.
Okay, so
Your Honor, I'm sorry.
Who seconded the motion? Do they have to withdraw as well?
I think
don't
I
think so.
seconded
Well,
it.
technically,
Technically, you can't withdraw.
once the motion has been made and seconded, it belongs to the body and it can't be withdrawn.
Okay.
My
All right.
suggestion is that we just vote on it, vote it down, and then vote on whether we want to move the TIF forward or not.
Well,
All right.
but before you do that, let me comment on a couple of things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've already tabled the master development agreement. All right. And now we're talking about the TIF agreement. The TIF agreement is drafted in such a way that it assumes that the master development agreement has already been approved. That is not the case. So that's one reason I would say recommend against approving the TIF agreement tonight, because that would be inconsistent with the language of the agreement itself. Second, with respect to the question of leverage and dealing with the wetland issue, I don't think it is necessarily clear in my mind if, for example, we were to approve the master development agreement and the TIF agreement without addressing the wetland issue. It is not entirely clear to me that we would have an effective opportunity to deal with that later. So I'm not convinced that that's the case. If you want to approve the master development agreement and the TIF agreement without requiring that the wetland issue be addressed, that's fine. That's okay with me. But I don't think it would be a good idea to let the master development agreement and the wetland issue hang out there, be unresolved, and go ahead and vote on the TIF agreement in any event. That to me doesn't make sense.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second right now, and I believe that is to postpone this as well as the other two that we had previously voted on. Is there any more comment on that motion? So all in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 And those opposed?
No,
No,
I'll
I
say
heard-
no.
I heard four
For the heck of
no's.
it.
You guys, you want a roll call?
Yeah.
Okay. Holly, can you set us up with a roll call? I think it was four no's, but I want to make sure.
Boersma,
no,
Caravello,
Aye.
Doom,
Aye.
Hiley,
Aye.
Hirsch,
Aye.
Hunt,
No,
Jensen,
No.
Bagaki,
Aye.
Maeski,
He might have dropped off. Unless
Yeah.
he's-
Something happened with people that were on the phone. It got cut off.
Yeah, it looks like, okay.
Reeves,
Aye.
Riley,
I will vote aye because of Matt's persuasive discussion.
Schumacher.
Birds of a feather.
Alder Schumacher,
Sorry, I was on mute. Aye.
okay, that motion carries. There were 3 no's.
All right, so we'll be bringing all three of them back on May 12th at the latest. If anybody has anything else that they're concerned about, please reach out to us, so we have time to dig into it, and then hopefully, we'll have all these, we're down to really 2 issues, so hopefully we'll have, answers for both of them come May 12th.
who can write who can write the language on that wetland stuff?
I think that Attorney Dragney will probably draft something once we have the information. And then, we'll try to share it.
move to adjourn, Tim?
There's a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Good night,
Any
everyone.
opposed? None opposed. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank